Thank you all so much for being here and for joining us for the opening of the exhibition, Istanbul Spaces of Freedom, and of course for our panel later this evening. So, as I said, we're overwhelmed by the interest. It's wonderful that everyone is here, and I hope there's a way that we can kind of make everybody feel comfortable. We still have a few kind of spots here in front if you'd like to, if you don't mind sitting on the floor. And then during the Q&A we can shift around as well. My name is Emine Fişek. I'm a research associate here at the Austrian Academy of Sciences here in Vienna. And I'm joined here by my colleagues Ahmet Ersoy from Boğaziçi University in Istanbul, Umut Türem from the University of Vienna, and photographer Manca Juvan from Ljubljana is joining us tonight. And I'll be introducing each of my colleagues momentarily, but first I thought I would just say a couple of words about the panel that we'll be holding this evening, as well as this exhibition, to give you a sense of how all of this kind of came together. So this panel, and indeed this exhibition, actually has its origins in a project that began at the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts under the direction of Professor Otto Lutar. So this project was entitled Istanbul Faces of Freedom and focused on, obviously, the city of Istanbul, and asked a very simple question. Istanbul is a major city, Otto Lutar noted, Byzantium in classical antiquity, Constantinople, the seat of successive empires, Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman, a major city and an object of both desire and conquest for thousands of years. But, Otto Lutar asked, just how free was Istanbul? In other words, did Istanbul represent a space of freedom for those who inhabited it? In asking this question, of course, Lutar was thinking about the modern history of European cities. Most scholars are in agreement that as European cities grew in the 18th and 19th centuries, they produced entirely new social experiences. As the waning of the feudal world and the arrival of mass industrialization prompted populations away from their villages and their homes towards urban centers, individuals found themselves experiencing entirely new freedoms, both enchanting, alluring, but at the same time terrifying. Gone was the world of family and of community, and in its place was a world of independence and anonymity, a chance for individuals to realize themselves in entirely new and different ways. And at the same time, of course, an intense loneliness and an intense alienation. So scholars argue that it was this tension, on the one hand between this newfound independence, and on the other hand between a radical sense of isolation, of being unmoored in the world, that gave birth to modern individualized society. So, back to Otto Lutar's question, did this happen in Istanbul? Or how did it happen? What did urban freedom look like in Istanbul, both then and now? So to answer this question, Lutar teamed up with Manca Juvan, and together they produced a lyrical photo book. And some of you may have looked at this book. If you haven't yet, you'll see it on your way out on the right, from which the photos that you see around us were selected. In Istanbul, Juvan documented cityscapes, streets, and Istanbullus, all in search of this elusive question. How free was/is Istanbul? So when I heard about this project, I was fascinated by this question of freedom and urbanity, and fascinated by the idea that photography as a medium could be used to actually capture this elusive experience. To explain very briefly, I'm working on a project on how theaters in different European cities are currently being impacted by urban transformation. So, how theaters are being displaced, new locations that they are moving to, and how their identities are changing in the process. In Istanbul, the city that is my focus, theater artists repeatedly tell me that theater goes where freedom is, and also that theater cannot survive in unfree urban fabrics. So I find myself constantly thinking about this question: what is a free urban fabric? When is an urban fabric free? When is it not? And how do we identify this experience when we see it? So in organizing this panel, our goal was to, in a way, continue this conversation that began at the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts, and to think about the relationship between Istanbul, freedom, and photography from a variety of angles. I'm grateful for the organizations that agreed to join us in this effort. First, Ersoy and Fabrikraum, thank you so much for hosting us. And second, Mona Schubert from FOTO WIEN 2025, within whose scope this exhibition is currently taking place. So, without further ado, our first speaker, Ahmet Ersoy, is Associate Professor in the Department of History at Boğaziçi University, where he works on the history of the late Ottoman Empire with a special focus on the changing role of visual culture in modernization and political transformation. His recent research in particular involves the connected histories of photography and print culture in the late Ottoman period. Our second speaker, Türem, currently a visiting researcher in the departments of Education and Near Eastern Studies at the University of Vienna, where he works on modern Turkish history with a special focus on the sociology of law. His latest research examines authoritarian political formations and their legal and socioeconomic foundations in the semi-peripheries of global political economy. Last but not least, our third speaker, Manca Juvan, is a Ljubljana-based photographer, videographer, and educator known for reportage and documentary work, with a special focus on books and films as forms. Examples of which include her monograph, Afghanistan, Unordinary Lives, and Istanbul, Faces of Freedom. Manca's work has earned numerous awards, and her ongoing project, The Sacrificed Valley, which explores the effects of industrial pollution on both human health and the environment, recently received the ESODOC Movies That Matter Award. Finally, let me conclude with a brief comment on today's event. We will begin with our first two speakers, each of whom will have approximately 15 minutes or so to present their work. We will then turn to our third speaker for a brief Q&A about the experience of working on this project, and then we will open the floor to a general Q&A and for all of your questions. So without further ado, thank you very much once again for joining us this evening, and we hope to hear all of your voices shortly. Thank you.
Böyle oldu. Full screen, right? Already full screen.
View full screen, like in the view bar, in the top.
Okay.
I don't know why
It shows the thumbnails for the other slides.
because it's actually keynote and PowerPoint.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Now we have this one. Excellent. What a performance. Evet, merhabalar, hello to all, and first of all, many thanks for involving me in this, especially to Emine and Manca. And I was fascinated by Manca's work already, and I feel it's really a privilege to be part of this discussion. I think we're moving on chronologically, where I start from the unrelated earlier stuff. I'll be talking about the early republic, and mainly I'll be talking about trash, garbage, and freedom. I guess I could put it in a nutshell like this. So mainly I'll be talking about a photography collection from Istanbul that's being archived by the Istanbul Research Institute, İstanbul Araştırmaları Enstitüsü. And we're working on a book and an exhibition project for next year, the fall of 2026, hopefully. And the collection comprises more than 22,000 photographs, all in the form of negatives, either glass negatives or acetate negatives, and they're being digitized as we speak. And the collection itself has this very ambiguous provenance. We don't really know how it traveled and ended up in an auction house from where the Institute has acquired them recently. And all of the photographs are from the late 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. There's nothing beyond the Second World War. And most of the photographs were taken by these two photojournalists, Namık Görgüç and his student, Selahattin Giz, who both worked for the newspaper Cumhuriyet, the Republic, which was founded in 1924, very influential daily that had very strong governmental ties, a newspaper that's still around today. So most of the photographs are by these two people, but we know that there are also others involved because these photographers, photojournalists work with very tight schedules. They have to go to different events every day, so they tended to share photographs. So we do know that there are also photographs by other photojournalists. Around this time, around the 30s, there were about 15, 16 photojournalists active in Istanbul. The collection that we have was formed by Selahattin Giz himself, who had this amazing archival drive. And if it weren't for him, the whole collection would have been discarded, would have gone into the garbage can. So he had this very strong intention for preserving and salvaging this professional memory. He wanted the photographer's labor to be acknowledged, and he wanted the information that they gathered to turn into documents for the future. So the whole collection was gathered together through a practice of hoarding, indiscriminate hoarding and piling. The whole material was piled together as a data dump. There's no organizational order to the collection, there's no organizational impulse, there's no narrative sequence, there are no captions that would anchor these photographs to a context, a historical context. They're all identified, we don't know which photograph was taken by whom. So we might call this an archive in the wild, or the term that I want to use for it is an anarchive, which is an anarchic collection that defies any kind of totalizing organizational logic. Could also call it a counter-archive, I guess. We know that Selahattin Giz had another bulk of photographs, another huge collection of better quality photographs that he donated to a bank, Yapı Kredi Bankası. And all the shitty photographs ended up in this collection. And this is what we like about it. We're assuming that he kept these photographs home at his house, and then somehow they ended up in this auction house after decades. He died in the early 1990s. So we could call this, I think, an archive against the grain. And what do I mean by this term, archive against the grain, is that today there's this very strong popular demand for photographs of Istanbul from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and the 50s. And they're usually used as markers of a vanished, more decent, more pristine urban past. They usually accompany Orhan Pamuk's renditions of the city, these faded, grainy, over or underexposed photographs that are used as signifiers of nostalgia. The image of Istanbul in our collection is the absolute diametric opposite. These are all unpublished photographs that were not mainly meant to be published, and they represent the unsavory, neglected underbelly of Istanbul and its marginalized, its silenced inhabitants. So the collection we're talking about is trash in many ways. So we can talk about it as trash in different levels. First of all, it was literally trash because we know that the photojournalists took many photographs every day during their peregrinations around the city. Very little of these photographs were published. Some of them were printed and went into the newspaper archives. So the newspaper archives only kept printed forms of photographs. And all the negatives went to the garbage can. Right? We know that Selahattin Giz and his teacher Görgüç collected these photographs, but we do also know that with this archival urge, Selahattin Giz roamed around the houses of his colleagues, photojournalists, and dug photographs out of garbage cans. Right? I'm sure some of these photographs came from the garbage can. They were rescued, right? So these photographs are literally garbage. On the other hand, they're also garbage because of their quality. Like the photographs that you see on the screen, there are many technically flawed, damaged, badly framed and blurry pictures that are basically unusable, right? For the purposes of photojournalism. They're also garbage, refuse, unusable in terms of their content, because like the photojournalists went to see an event. This is the famous 1929 fire in Tatavla, this Greek neighborhood in Istanbul. So you can see a picture by either Giz or Görgüç that was printed in the newspaper. But we also have a whole array, dozens of other photographs, where the photographer went around and basically recorded whatever he deemed worthy of attention in his surroundings. So accompanying these images of the fire, you have people coming out of their houses trying to understand what's going on. Obviously, these are not to be used in the newspaper. They're not going to be printed. So we have this huge array of unsolicited photographs produced by these people. And also, you know, most of the photographs are meaningless in terms of the newspapers because they represent the rubbish of mundane everyday life, and they portray the ordinary citizens. As you know, history portrays important men, right? It's usually not interested in the lives of these ordinary people, but the collection gives us a rich picture of all of these individuals whose stories we don't know because they weren't recorded by the annals of history. So rubbish in that way as well, in a good way. When I use the term rubbish, I'm always using it in a positive sense, right? As you might have realized. And again, many pictures were rubbish because they were risky or objectionable. politically, morally, in terms of public decency or propriety, especially when we're thinking about the 1930s or 40s, within the kind of global context. Also in Turkey, we're talking about an increasingly authoritative single-party regime with extremely strict press laws and censorship regimes. So most of the pictures that were taken by these authors were unpublishable, simply unthinkable to be published. So what we're looking at is behind the scenes of the Republican political order, or maybe you can call it the political unconscious of the Republic. And if you compare this to how the Republic was officially trying to represent itself in visual terms, you have this. On the right, you have an image from the official journal La Turquie Kemaliste. And from the left, on the left, you have a picture from our collection, the celebrations of the Republic, basically projecting an image of a progressive, orderly, thoroughly westernized society. This was basically the state-sanctioned vision. Our collection, on the other hand, is totally uniconic, and it has this in-your-face kind of realism and bluntness, where it portrays these neglected, poverty-stricken neighborhoods, totally silenced and marginalized groups and individuals. So in terms of also content, why do I have this? Huh? There you go. In terms of content as well, in terms of the people that are represented, we're also talking about refuse. These are the people who have been refused by the official visual regime of the Republic. I might have a couple of others. This, again, basically the same thing. And you have a lot of these contrasts in the collection as well, where you have, you know, for instance, children from the more well-to-do neighborhoods, in contrast to a whole other array of pictures of working children. And especially during the Second World War, this was a major, major problem. So the result is a street archive of sorts, stretching across wildly different photographic genres and formats. You have portraits, you have group photographs, you have forensic photographs, cityscapes, sports photography, and so on. And all of these basically conform to the 1930s, 40s photojournalistic aesthetics of transparency, where you have many of these, what were called fast photographs or candid photographs, which were totally uncomposed, unstudied, that were geared to kind of convey the fleeting moment where the photographer met his subjects, and many of the photographs were clandestinely taken, where the subjects photographed were not aware that they were being photographed. Stuck. Oh, I'm trying to move the picture. Okay, I'm rearranging my pictures. Here we go. So what we have, basically gushing out of this jumbled, chaotic archive, is mostly, when I take a cross-section, what I see is the mundane lives of ordinary citizens of the city. Now, the question I have, and there's no, I don't have an answer yet. How do you reckon with? How do you deal with such an archive, which is an archive? An archive is a very powerful memory tool, and it implies institutional intervention, which is implicated on the power, the authority, the privilege to select, to order, and sometimes to discard. So any archival endeavor is a displacement of lived memory. So how do I impose an order on something that resists wholeness, that does not have its own inherent internal order, but it has many uncertainties, it has many ambiguities? How do I convey and acknowledge the messiness and the rawness of this archive as I am representing it, as I'm presenting it, for instance, in an exhibition? How does one intervene and turn a data dump into an archive? How do you move from piling to filing? Are the questions I have in mind. And the broader historiographical question, broader question I have in terms of the writing of history is, how do we make a case? Why am I keeping on doing this? Here you go. Actually, no. Okay, I thought I had another one. Maybe I even deleted some slides. See, I'm talking about intervention here. Okay, there you go. I had an excellent slide which I lost in the meanwhile. Anyway, so the critical question regarding the historian is, how do we speak for, how do we make a case for the underprivileged subjects that are depicted in these pictures, in these photographs? How do we represent their subaltern histories? More importantly, how do I, for instance, avoid replicating the polarizing categories that are imposed by standardized history writing? The image we have in by now established history writing of the early republic is an image of an authoritarian state, yes. Implementing top-down reforms, yes, which were passively, if not reluctantly, received by the citizens. And so we have this image, already established, embedded image of these reforms being conducted in vacuum, right? But what I see when I'm looking at this collection, and which is in tune with more revisionist recent scholarship on the early republic, what I see is people, right? What I see is a glimpse into the ordinary life of people's agency, their presence as actors. So despite the pressure, despite all the authoritarianism, which was very much there, what I see is in these pictures is the streets are boiling, right, with action. The streets are vibrant with action, where we have people expressing their demands, people expressing their anger and their anguish, right? We see them negotiating with the center of power. We see them sometimes collaborating with the center of power. We see them sometimes contesting, openly confronting the center of power through street demonstrations. Like we have all these accounts of people writing, for instance, petitions to the city councils. In the newspapers where some of these pictures were published, you have letters, readers' letters, who are basically conveying their complaints. You have the presence of people in these, for instance, elections. These are pictures from different elections. We hear almost the voices of people in the courtroom. There's a good deal of courtroom photographs, and the bottom two are from the 1947 Aslanköy trials. I don't know, maybe some of you might have heard of this. The first elections, local elections, where an opposition party was involved. There's this village on the top of the Taurus Mountains, which voted for the opposition. The government, the soldiers came and they tried to confiscate the ballot box. They didn't give the ballot box. They kept it. They said, this is our honor, we're not giving the ballot box. They ended up in the court. Women, children, men, the whole village was in the courtroom, and this is like a picture from that court. We see people trying to express themselves as convicts, We see them expressing themselves through strikes. The upper left one is from the Grevi. We see people expressing themselves through telling stories over a bottle of rakı. We see them telling stories through the display, the forensic display of their bodies, through art, through festivities. Again, Tatavla, this is the carnival in Tatavla on the right. Cheering in sports events, or even sometimes through dancing. So we have this very strong presence and sense of agency exuding from the photographs. But here the question, I'm going back to the historiographical framework again, I certainly don't want to depict these people's story as one of heroic resistance. I don't want to romanticize their resistance. I don't want to portray the collection as a manifestation of Istanbul exotic underground. That there is the temptation, believe me, if you see the pictures. But the broader question I have, my major concern relates to the ethics of historical reconstruction and the ethics of historical imagination. Do I have the right to give these people a voice? They are totally voiceless. There's no text, there's nothing attached to these photographs. You just see these fragments, silent fragments of life. Do I have the authority to endow these pictures with a voice? How, there is this sense of agency, but how do I restore their agency? How do I restore their presence while capturing and conveying the silences of this archive, its polyphony, its messiness, its being full of these life fragments that survived these people? So my initial gambit, my initial move, and that's where I am at the moment, is just precaution. You know, I want to avoid, you know, restoring the collection and restoring the voices included in the collection to wholeness. I don't want to restore something that does not have a wholeness into a whole. I don't want to present a picture of resistance, defiance, obedience, or despair, or poverty. I just want to acknowledge the wholeness that the collection itself defies, right? And this precaution is where I stand now. I can't give you like magical answers by which I can, you know, next year present this material. But if you have any ideas, if you can share your suggestions, I would be very glad, would be welcome. Thank you. No, it's Manca Juvan.
My glass. Well, it's really hard to talk after this brilliant talk, I have to say, and it sparked so many ideas in my head already. So basically, Ahmet is asking the question if he is free, actually, to, you know, create a whole out of something that's not a whole. My talk, unfortunately, will not be that creative, but like I just wanted to play perhaps on these words of, you know, chasing. So I just wanted to say, first and foremost, you know, chasing is, I'm using it in a double sense, obviously, and in this brief talk, so I will try to combine academic glasses with some form of, aesthetic sensibility, and I will allow myself to speak a little more freely. I won't define urbanity or freedom or whatever, but I just want to get into perhaps a productive dialogue by not defining these terms. I will make somewhat arbitrary distinction between social and political freedom, and then I will fuse them later on. So to start with the social, Emine has already pointed out, urban life, metropolis, the city, however you want to call it, has always been considered the gate to freedom. And I have these pictures that are from the archive that's called internet, unlike Ahmet's great archive.
Equally chaotic.
Equally chaotic and equally trash, but not trash in the bad sense in some ways. But so, however you want to call it, the urban life is considered the gate to freedom, and even to certain forms of emancipation. It is the space where individuals are considered to be freed from their traditional ties, such as extended family networks, feudal or quasi-feudal relations of small community identities. Simply, cities offer spaces where people can become anonymous. While such anonymity is obviously not limitless, and I want to talk about this a little more, the potential is out there for those who are seeking it, right? Those who are looking to be free from their social ties can blend and disappear in the sea of nobodies. This is the gate to freedom, an early depiction of the gate to freedom. And this is the sea of nobodies. If you go to Istiklal Street anytime during the day, you would easily see what a sea of nobodies is like. But freedom can also mean freedom in the economic sense, or the ability to earn one's own life, not through traditional networks, ties and relationships, but through the essentially anonymous mechanisms of the market. In other words, and to be very simplistic for a moment, if you come from your village or small town, and if you want to be free from the poverty or exploitation you face there, and if you want to start a new life, the city offers many opportunities. But this is a double-edged sword. It means freedom to the extent that it has the potential to free you from chronic poverty and from socially familiar types of exploitation. It can lead you to open your own shop, for instance, and become your own boss. And Manca has in her book actually photos of these people. But such an individual moving from the countryside can be quite unfree at the factory, or these days in a small service job, like in a department store. So this is the paying for freedom. Although this photo is from Ankara, I have to admit, it actually shows you, like you need to actually work long hours in a department store in order to buy your freedom. So all work and very little play will make you a dull, tired, and almost unfree person, to cite Stanley Kubrick in a deformed way. However, even in such a scenario, your boss actually does not have a socially recognizable face or name. And such loosened social ties have a freeing effect, especially because this means you have non-work time. Freedom, in other words, has its price to be paid with different currencies, such as bodily labor or long hours working in a departmental store or in front of a computer, like the white-collar people we are. Even when you're a small business owner and your own boss, you still face a lot of hardships. It takes generations to build a solid economic enterprise, so it's not easy to be free. This is more or less the ideal, typical story of Western societies. Istanbul has been a little different, and we all know this. And in this sense, Istanbul is like New York, actually. We can make this comparison later. It is true that between 1940s and all the way to 2010s, there has been a constant flow of migrants, people from the countryside to Istanbul, in search of better economic opportunities. But the faces of freedom has been rather different. According to Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality's report published in 2020, and now here the numbers well, Istanbul is home to 6,632 townsmen associations, Hemşeri Derneği in Turkish. 6,632 associations. And 167 umbrella federation of such associations and 13 confederations, even bigger, umbrella organizations for these umbrella associations. So it seems that traditional ties, at least in the form of extended family networks and townsmanship, continue to shape the lives of Istanbulites. And urban freedoms come with the price of longing for the small communities, for the homes that are left behind. Or in some cases, these homes are never left behind fully. Like there's quite a bit of going back and forth between the small towns or villages and Istanbul. So some people chased freedom as economic opportunities in the streets of Istanbul, an adventure well depicted by Manca's book here. And I have to add, a slow motion depiction of such a chase also appears in the pages of Orhan Pamuk novel, As Strangers in My Mind. I didn't know that you also have a reference to it, but it's a nice coincidence.
I have a reference to it as well.
Great minds think alike, let's put it that way. But Orhan Pamuk's book is actually, I really like it because it uses this metaphor of boza, which is like, it can actually be extended. It's not like, it's a fluid, but it's not like super fluid. It can be almost in not so fluid form, and the guy moves around in Istanbul and tries to get a sense of the city and whatnot, and he finds his freedom with his family though. However, now economic opportunities and freedom via some form of economic well-being have not been the only goal that was chased in the streets of Istanbul. Particularly from the 1990s onwards, Istanbul was a destination of those who were looking for peace and some form of quiet. I mean those who came due to the war between Kurdish guerrillas and the Turkish military in the southeast. Some of these people who come to Istanbul fled their homes with their own will, escaping from the war. Some of them had to escape due to their villages having been burned. So they hope to find freedom in Istanbul, but now freedom means freedom as peace, right? So freedom here meant not necessarily an individual freedom from traditional ties or searching for economic opportunities per se. It is a collective search. And such collective search for freedom in Istanbul came with heavy feelings of nostalgia, something Ahmet also touched upon in a different way. But this nostalgia most likely is heavier than the one experienced by non-Kurdish migrants. To make up for such nostalgia, perhaps, freedom for these people do not necessarily mean sailing away from their small communities or distant towns. In fact, freedom has involved building such communities. The way you want to build them, the way you want to remember them, the way you want to imagine them. We see the same pattern more recently in the case of Syrians who came to Turkey to find peace and freedom from fear, right? So Istanbul now offers freedom in the form of peace to those people coming from distant lands. Needless to add, for those people who feel pressured by place-based belonging, freedom may not be attained at all, or attained narrowly in Istanbul, due to the creation of versions of the small communities that were left behind in Istanbul. People from the same city or town and their families usually end up in similar quarters of the city for economic and convenience reasons. While this is a way for a smoother transition to urban life, it chips away from the promise of freedom, not entirely, but to a certain extent. And if you actually look at the Turkish movies of 1970s and 80s, a lot of them talk about this question of, gecekondu's and how people actually achieve this relatively smooth transition to the modern, to the urban areas. But still, Istanbul has become so big, so large, that it gives you the opportunity to hide, run away, or be yourself in a different quarter. So Istanbul is, giant. After the 1990s especially, such place-based limitations in the way of freedom of individuals and families have declined significantly due to the growth of the city, massive growth of the city, diversification of economic activity, and increasing separation of living quarters from workplaces. So now a lot of Istanbulites actually live in one place and work in another place, and the distance between these two is quite considerable, giving people a level of freedom, actually. The city offers not just social mobility and freedom, so I'm now switching to the political side. I have already done it, but I want to sort of deepen it a little bit. The city offers not just social mobility and freedom in the economic sense, but as I hinted, urban locations offer higher possibilities of political freedom as well. This is certainly related to social freedoms, particularly for those people who have moved to Istanbul to breathe or to stay away from violence that they see in their smaller communities. There is a very thin line in Turkey, in Istanbul naturally, and elsewhere, I have to add, that separates the social freedoms as they are imagined in the sociology canon, as Emine talked about, like individuals moving from countryside to the urban, and then having a great time, having great individual freedoms. So these types of freedoms are only thinly separated from political freedoms in Istanbul. Take people who are running away from gender identity-based violence and discrimination in their small towns, for instance. Istanbul promises both safety and community for them, but at the same time continued violence. Urban freedom for queer and trans subjects, in other words, is intertwined with urban violence. Yet the city offers them a better place where they can become politically active in addition to being themselves, right? And in some cases, being yourself means, a political act anyway. But if you are politically active, then you are suspect. Even if your child was one of the forcibly disappeared, and what you do is just sit in an urban square, in this case the Galatasaray Square, for a long time. If you're an opposition figure, or an Armenian, a non-Turk, you are just suspect, and you basically face the sheer brutal force of the police. Here, in this case, you see the son of the assassinated journalist Hrant Dink being, or the police wants to take him, and his friends actually try to kind of not give him to the police. So this is an iconic photo, actually. It's almost like, it looks like the Renaissance photos in some ways. So this is, here in the middle is Hrant Dink's son, Ahmet Dink, and people who are trying to defend him are from the party, from the Kurdish party. So if you're an Armenian, if you're just a trans individual, you are automatically suspect, and here you see, police chasing the people after a pride march. Then what is being chased are your freedoms. The police chases you, chases peace, chases identity, chases freedom and in and through the streets of Istanbul. So urban locations are politically dangerous, in fact, for governments and the establishment, and locations like Istanbul are even more so. They are nationally visible, and whatever happens in them have seismic effects throughout the country. due essentially to mass media communicating what happens in big cities to the rest of the nation. Also, mind you, about 1/5 of the population of Turkey lives in Istanbul. This is a massive number. And there probably are very few households in Turkey which do not have a relative, acquaintance, or a friend in Istanbul. So what happens in Istanbul is like a stone dropped in a still lake. It's spread in circles every which way. That's why authorities want to control the cities, Istanbul in particular, guard them, arm them, and their most visible sites in particular, like the Taksim Square of Istanbul. And governments increasingly and unfortunately getting better at this. They also disguise such maneuvers of crushing dissent with the discourse of law and order. This is taken in sometime before May 1st. I don't know which year, but Taksim must be closed for May 1st demonstrations, and the police is right there. And of course, there's a history to this. I won't go into too much detail, but from the 1950s onwards, Istanbul has been home to biggest demonstrations of labor, students, women, etc. These demonstrations were protests for some, celebrations for others. Some of them were peaceful, some of them were violent, such as the famous, or infamous, May 1st celebrations in 1977. It's called the Bloody May 1st. But I want to now come to the more recent history. And the biggest among these demonstrations or protests is the most colorful, the most unfathomable, the most unconceptualizable perhaps was the Gezi Park protests of 2013. It was a movement, celebration, occupation, protest, and a carnivalesque gathering at the same time. It was a major call for voice, democracy, and freedom. And in these, it was political. It was deeply political. But it was also about claiming a space to breathe, to flourish, to freely enjoy being young and together. And here, young does not denote age. It denotes an experience. It denotes a way of feeling or a structure of feeling. Against the dogmas and dictates of the autocratic government and its cronies, people actually gathered there to, assert themselves and their rights and freedom. It was so powerful, Gezi was so powerful, that its specter still haunts Turkey. The specter of Gezi is still a nightmare for the government. Back then, the government moved to extremes due to its fear and its inability to endorse freedom and democracy. Simply put, the government 12 years ago, when Gezi had taken place, and the government today cannot tolerate freedom. Today is way worse, however. Political unfreedom is coupled with economic and social unfreedom. Istanbul is no longer a place to come and enjoy anonymity and some form of economic freedom. It is rather a Hobbesian jungle where, to use Hobbes's words, life is nasty, brutish, and short, particularly for those whose economic conditions are not so fortunate. Equally bad, the city has turned into a political nightmare. Pride March, not allowed. Workers' Day March, not allowed. Sit-ins, not allowed. The government cannot even tolerate students protesting the takeover of their university, and back then my university, and still currently Ahmet's university. So students protesting the takeover of their university and the appointment of undeserving regime cronies to the best public university in the country, such student protests, even within campuses, within the campus of the university, are handled with brute force, and you see here the police circling the students. Students are chased all the way to their homes. Freedom is swept off of the streets into private areas first. But then, even in the private sphere, people, the youth, is not left alone. Here is a photograph. The police kindly entering into the homes of Boğaziçi students. And youth is further brought to courthouses for protesting the takeover of Istanbul municipality back in March 19. What is equally bad is that the city's cultural life is also targeted by the government, such that it is almost forbidden to be young in the city. And again, young is not about age. Just very recently, perhaps, even like today or yesterday, I was reading in the news that several concerts were cancelled. Morrissey concert got cancelled. Robbie Williams concert got cancelled, and these were done in the name of these are artists supporting Israel or something like that. But basically, Istanbul turned into a city where fun actually decreased. Having fun and having a jolly good time, that's also cancelled. Almost worse though, and I'm kind of coming to the end of my talk, is that all these are disguised behind a language of benevolence, a terribly masculine and patriarchal discourse of protecting the common good, protecting our youth, protecting women, and the government basically almost comes full circle. The government is protecting you from you. So many concerts are cancelled and so many festivals forbidden. However, whatever the authorities do, and I want to finish on a sort of relatively positive note, whatever the authorities do, they cannot chase the freedom chasers fully off the streets. Be it the youth, women, students, labor, or trans, queer, Kurds, or academics for that matter. Urban spaces are germane. They are productive for political action. Protesters are always one step ahead of the police, at least because of the fact that they desire to achieve something, right? Something meaningful. Also, an urban metropolis, and in the case of Istanbul, a megapolis, is impossible to fully domesticate. Whatever powers a government has, it cannot make the city surrender. It is just too wild an animal, too complex an organism to be brought under control. And in the case of Istanbul, just look at its topography. This is a very small picture, obviously, but this topography is so rich, so alluring, so attractive for the rulers throughout the long history of the city, making it an imperial capital in most of its life. Yet such topography is also so evocative for freedom chasers. Just look at the Bosphorus. There is no need to chase anything there. The wind, the seagulls, the boats, the smell of the sea, all these connecting the past to the present and to the future. However you try to destroy this beautiful city, I would say it will win each time. It houses not only the many faces of freedom, I think it is freedom itself. Thanks for listening.
So, thank you both so much. You've given us a lot to think about. On the one hand, this distinction between social freedom in the city and the kind of urban spaces that are in which it flourishes, and on the other hand, political freedom in the city and the kinds of urban spaces it requires, and the kinds of urban spaces that constantly survive in that dialectic between flourishing and destruction. And then this question of photography. What is agency in a photograph, right? It seems like this question keeps coming back up. When you endow a photograph with a voice, right? however tentatively and with caution we try to do so, does that automatically mean you endow it with wholeness? Is that the fundamental problem of historical reconstruction? Is there a way around that binary? So we can come back to these questions, but before we do that, I wanted to turn briefly to Manca. I know you said you don't want to talk a lot, but at the same time we have questions for you precisely because in many ways you're like Selahattin Giz, right? You arrive in, right? So my first question for you is what kind of a fieldwork process did you engage in? How did you find a path for yourself in the city? How did you go about, now that you were kind of given this task, right? Or gave yourself this task, how did you go about charting your way through the city?
Well, I will return to the strangeness on my mind because the first thing when I was invited to the project was came with a book on my mail. So Otto has sent me the copy of the book, which inspired him also in the sense that he chose this theme and this question in the case of Istanbul. And I read it, but I read it, of course, through a photographer's eyes, which means that for me it was, I wanted to feel the Istanbul of the time. And I think Pamuk is wonderful in giving this feeling, experience of feeling, or maybe I say he's wonderful because I'm an outsider. And I do come from this Orientalist view on the Istanbul as a city and as a tradition. I come from Slovenia, and you know I've grown up with stories and also the visual image of what Istanbul should be, and that's why the book itself was appealing to me. But so in terms of searching for this mood of the city, which I also am a photographer, and we didn't speak about Araguler, but his images from the 50s, they are very, I mean, these are black and white, but he's, as Hugh Pope in an essay, the journalist who also wrote an essay for the book and lived 30 years in the city, I think he described them as, they're black and white, but very black indeed, actually. I am wondering, so in terms, there is this, in a way, as an outsider, the romantic view on the city that I want to overcome with progress, but I started from this position. That's also why the book starts with this experience of a city through the streets, through the cityscapes, and then through the streets. How do you experience the city as an outsider? What do you see? What do you feel? And then going slowly more into the intimate lives of individuals. But yeah, I was privileged because though I lived in Iran for years, I speak Persian, I don't speak Turkish, so to have an anthropologist and a journalist of local origins was a real help for me to work around, to kind of be able to have a dialogue of what the possible locations could be. I also have to know that I wasn't on a journalist visa, so this is something that I took into account because I didn't want to be too visible, and also it defined in a style or in terms of how I photograph something and what am I interested in, so I wasn't working as a photojournalist, and to my surprise when I was watching photojournalistic work, they didn't work as, he said the majority of work that they didn't end up in the newspaper, but they were really interested about life and people as ordinary citizens and who they are basically as people and their humaneness. So this is something that when I was photographing people also, it's what drove me. It was my interest. So, and to access these people, because I came first for 3 weeks and then what was it, another 2 weeks, I had very, very limited of time. So it was really helpful for me to kind of be able to have the dialogue, and then locate the potential locations and to discuss about who could be photographed in terms of a daily life series that are part of the books or intimate series. And it worked through, as I said, the journalists and the anthropologists help, but also through contacts and friends. And I asked them, what do you suggest and what do you feel is important? And this is also how I came to meet Umut, who helped me to get entrance to be able to photograph the protests at the Boğaziçi University, which are still happening every day at noon. And otherwise, I mean, if I would apply for official permission, I'm sure I wouldn't be able to get it. And this is how slowly it evolved, I think, the narrative. Yeah, and also because we knew we wanted to make it a book, I think it was very important, the question of how we structure the book's narrative. And this one is kind of has a circular narrative, actually, and it is centered in with the text, the essays of Toluta, the historian, Hugh the journalist, and two Turkish artists, Gorkan Mozimir and Seyfnes Laikal in the center. And there's also a conversation with Mladen Dalar, who is connected to Istanbul as well in some ways. But I also kind of, because this is a project that gave the freedom and opportunity to experiment a little bit, and for us from different practices to collaborate together. So between the scientific approach and more intuitive artistic approach, I wanted to kind of, I'm not sure whether I succeeded or if it's visible, but to kind of play with more the viewing from left to right, which is more rational. And if you look at it from the other side, so from right to left, it's more emotional. And where these two worlds meet, I think both aspects are very important. And only if these two ways of looking at something are combined, and in this sense also the outsider's view and the insider's view, where they meet, where they collide, it also gives another layer of richness to how we look at something. In this case, of course, Istanbul and the question of freedom in a metropolis. Yeah, I was very long. I'm sorry.
No. In the process, you actually, I had a follow-up question, but you've already kind of answered it. So I was going to say, on the one hand, again, you have this mandate to go to Istanbul and to, photograph faces of freedom. But it's not a data collection, right? At the same time, you're trying to create an artistic product that's supposed to create an experience in those who gaze at it, right? So what I wanted to ask you was how you balance, on the one hand, the more documentary impulse, and then on the other hand, the more kind of artistic impulse. And what you're suggesting is that it depends on the angle from which you're coming to the photograph. To a certain extent.
This is when we speak about the narrative, when we speak about this whole that you want to avoid, and if you want to avoid it, you cannot, because there's some sort of combination of several images, or it always makes it a whole. So I think because your question made me think, also there's of course an idea that, because there is a truth that an image carries in itself. It's like, if you orient it yourself by that as a guideline how to actually navigate or where to go or how to put it together, I think that's a very honest way of putting it. So you're not getting into a trap of either ideologists or, and also you have this difficulty about talking about the past. It's not a present life, which you have not experienced. And you have sources from different sides, and then again, it's an interpretation of some sort. So how to avoid that? I think with exhibition and a space, it's easier than in a linear form, because you have different ways of how to separate and put images that kind of either have a similar feeling, or like we saw portraits of ordinary people like Paul Strand's, very much in this straight photography style. I mean, they're beautiful. But they speak about humaneness of individuals they convey or they portray, So this is powerful. And then you have the actions. You said you want to avoid the underground rebellious type of, but at the same time, yes, sure, you don't want to make another cliche of the time that existed. But if there's a lot of, I wonder why, you know, if there's really the majority, why not give it more emphasis, not to totally. But yeah, I love playing with creating narratives. I think this is something that drives me. That's also why I'm interested in book form or in film. But I find that film, as it is linear, has much more limitations than book form or even exhibition. So yeah, how to be ethical about it is a tough question, because for me, especially as an outsider, because I always get a chance to leave, and I worked like in Afghanistan, and I lived in Iran, and etc. And I always found myself in this feeling of guilt, in a way, that people are in tough social circumstances, their lives are challenged. I'm documenting that, but at the end of the day, my passport, which I got by where I was born, that has nothing to do with me, but it gives me the privilege of leaving. And therefore also this is the freedom connected to it. And in a way, yeah, you see that your images can hurt people, even unintentionally. So in the present, but you know what's, even after several decades like this, we found some images trashed and we bring them back. We don't know who these people actually are, but some people in the society may recognize this person and, you know, put a name on it, so first and last name, and that can change everything. But at the same time, when an image is out there, you can't control it anymore. You have to try and do your thing with most ethics that's at the time you can, but you know, I think if you remember Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother photograph, it's an iconic photograph from the Great Depression. Do you have it in mind, maybe? So Lange photographed her, but she didn't know who she is. They didn't really interact, and etc. Years later, you know, the family, the children, stood up and, you know, gave it a name and actually claimed that this iconic image really ruined their lives, if I'm brutal, kind of, because they were always marked as poor and underprivileged and etc. So that's the States. Of course, they ask for compensation and stuff like that. So you don't know whether. Also, what are the interests behind the people who and etc. So it's a very complex, process. And but even if you have good intentions, and it's right and it's important for us that we deal with narratives, visual narratives, to have good intentions and try our best, we never can prevent, you know, from things going sour or putting somebody in a difficult situation or influencing their lives. In a way, we all, photographers, we all want our images to influence our lives, as general, the viewers, your lives, basically. So we all dream of our image or our photograph triggering something in you as a viewer, a thought, an action, or a memory for that instance. But we can only do as much. We're only photographers in a way, and the person on the other side is only a person being photographed. So you as the viewer also have a very important role, I would say. We are in this triangle together of creating meaning to an image, and we decide, you know, with our imagination, whether this has agency really or not. Jesus, I was long again.
No. So on that note, on the note of creating a triangle of meaning, So I wanted to open it up both to our two panelists, but also, of course, to our audience for questions, comments, reactions, thoughts that you'd like to share.